Chapter 261 The King of Greed. Several things happened at the same time. At the moment when the forces of the King of Gluttony clashed against the forces of the Queen of Fury, the army of the Dungeon Market led by Orobus, the strongest Herculean power, hit the Temple of the Eight Clans and other important areas. Right at the moment when the Queen of Fury clashed with the King of Lust, the King of Pride led by Franz, the best intellect, and Abrasax, the strongest magical power, to attack the King of Violence. When Yong-ho, the King of Greed, saved the Queen of Fury from the King of Lust, Gusion, regarded as the strongest among Mammon's 12 spirits, defeated Orobus. In the meantime, there was a final battle going on between the King of Violence and the King of Pride in the western region. All three battles were over finally, but Yong-ho did not move, leaning back in the captain's seat of the giant red dragon Tiamat. Shortly after, Yong-ho led his subordinate spirits through the door of space to support the Queen of Fury. Tigrius headed north with Tiamat, the giant red dragon. Whatever the outcome of the battle, he needed to pick up Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits immediately. The 24 hours required for the reopening of the door of space were too long. When Yong-ho drove out the forces of the King of Gluttony by joining hands with the Queen of Fury, Tiamat, led by Tigrius, arrived timely. Despite the tragic massacres at the temple and elsewhere, the Queen of Fury fought it out tenaciously. She belatedly cried out at the tragedy, but she wept behind Yong-ho's back. Tears were all over her face, even though she tried to hide it. She also got aboard Tiamat, trusting Yong-ho's hypothesis that the King of Violence might have been ambushed. Some representatives of the 8 clans were strongly opposed to her riding Yong-ho's flying vehicle, Tiamat, only with her bodyguards. She didn't give up. Dhritarashtra, the Queen of Fury, trusted Yong-ho as an ally as well as a man. Besides, the giant red dragon, Tiamat, was essential in supporting the King of Violence. Tiamat, Mammon's flagship flying vehicle, which was completed by Citri, could fly in the sky several times faster than the giant wild bird, Astra. But everything was too late. Shortly after Tiamat headed west, Yong-ho heard several other news. Citri woke up after recovering. The King of Violence's secret hideout, Rare, disappeared from the ground. Citri didn't say much, perhaps because the Queen of Fury was right next to her, or perhaps because she was still feeling unwell. Citri only said that the King of Violence made himself explode to defeat the King of Pride, adding that she would talk more at the Garden of Life. Now, about 30 minutes had passed since Yong-ho was briefed about the war status. Master, you have arrived at the Temple of the 8 Clans. The Queen of Fury is preparing to get off, Tiamat Lucia whispered to Yong-ho in a cautious voice. Feeling a bit heavy, Yong-ho raised himself. When he got out of the captain's door, Catalina, who was sitting in the hallway, quickly stood up. Why don't you come inside, sighed Yong-ho. When he expressed sympathy, Catalina laughed awkwardly and said timidly, Because I thought you wanted to stay alone there. She let down her ears as if she was blue, but her tail fluttered slightly. He felt light-hearted when he noticed her lovely posture. After patting her hair pleasantly, he stepped forward hurriedly. There were already lots of people gathered when he got off Tiamat. The Queen of Fury and her bodyguards, including Kirtimuka, were in one place, while Kaiwan and the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon were on standby across them. The Queen of Fury, standing with her shoulders drooping as if feeling melancholic, quickly corrected her posture when she saw Yong-ho. She first walked to him with strides and reached out. He did not hesitate to shake her hands again this time. He held her little warm hand. A smile was once again on her face. Thank you for helping me a lot today. I think I owe you so much that I can't pay it back easily. In fact, it wasn't just that he saved her from the King of Lust. Gustion and other subordinate spirits he dispatched saved the Temple of the 8 Clans and their representatives. Although half of them, including King Yaksha and King Maharaga, were killed, she had to give Yong-ho the credit for the survival of other representatives. Her sincere look and voice also boosted Yong-ho's morale. He said, tightening his hand holding hers, You're welcome. We are allies. The Queen of Fury laughed again. Not only the King of Violence and the heads of the 8 clans were like adult protectors that she could rely on. Despite the loss of half of them, she could not lose her courage, not because she was the queen, but because of her alliance with the House of Mammon, which they formed without any detailed plan at first. I look forward to seeing you again sooner or later. It's time for us to really work together. It was certain that the king of violence made a suicidal attack against the king of pride, but it was unclear what happened to the king of pride and the two directors of the dungeon market. Moreover, the king of lust was still alive. I look forward to working with you too. Goodbye, Yong-ho said goodbye to her. The queen of fury let go of his hand reluctantly. Looking back at him once more, she got off Tiamat with her bodyguards. Watching all this, Kaiwan narrowed her eyes with suspicion. She pointed at the queen with her chin. She whispered to Catalina next to her. Hey, don't you think she is openly trying to woo him? What do you think as a seasoned expert in this field? Catalina opened her eyes wide at her unexpected question, because she recalled Eustia's love horoscope, the owner of the third card. A pure virgin. Like Catalina, she was born under the same star sign and was protected by a drunk dragon. While blinking her eyes, Catalina quickly raised her tail as if she was a bit upset. Why was she called a gullible, pure virgin like her? But she admitted the reality easily and pondered over her question. While Kaiwan and Catalina chatted like this, new passengers appeared at Tiamat, the red giant dragon. They were Gusyon and the arena spirits under his command, Master Gusyon. Instead of shaking hands, Yong-ho and Gusyon lightly touched their palms. Just a quick look at their body could confirm how violent and intense their battles were. How about Oravas? Was he strong enough? Well, he is a level lower than you, Master. Cracking a joke like that? Gusyon stepped aside. Ophelia and Eligos, who appeared behind this giant monster Gusyon, once again got a lot of load off Yong-ho's heart. Thanks for your great work, Eligos and Ophelia. I, Ophelia, the daughter of Enderion, am honored to see you, our master of the Mammon family master. It's nice to see you back. Ophelia greeted Yong-ho politely, while Eligos, who was momentarily embarrassed by Ophelia's verbose greetings, replied as usual while trying in vain to come up with some nice greetings. Yong-ho tried to appreciate the great fighting of the arena spirits. In fact, he felt a bit awkward to do so because there were some previous masters of the Mammon family among them, but none of them complained to Yong-ho because they had been in the arena for so long and they recognized him as the king of greed. Right at the moment when Yong-ho was about to praise the arena spirits, he shuddered with some moaning, Master King of Greed. At that moment, all their voices, including Gusyon's, were silenced by a big shouting. It was the shouting of the Queen of Fury, who got out of Tiamat, the giant red dragon. Yong-ho felt his heart was beating. It was pounding more violently than ever. When he got the godly energy of gluttony or faced the Queen of Fury right before his eyes, his heart didn't beat so violently as it did now. Breathing out roughly, he hurriedly jumped out of Tiamat. He saw the Queen of Fury and her bodyguards waiting for him outside. All of them were pointing in one direction, and the Queen of Fury laid her hands on her chest as if she felt something strange. Yong-ho also looked at the sky. It was approaching him. The more he closed the distance with it, the more his heart was pounding. It's the godly energy of greed, he said spontaneously. Cain Catalina, who had the strongest eyesight among them, spoke. But it was only a moment. Catalina witnessed the object flying from a distance change its shape. Initially, it looked like an old-fashioned magic wand, but it now turned into a simple stick. Then it transformed itself again and finally took the form of a spear. Yong-ho raised his hand. He held the spear that flew through the sky in his hand. It was such an exquisite crossover that nobody knew whether he caught it or it landed on his hand. But not only Yong-ho, but everyone else knew what it was. The Queen of Fury, who had the sin of fury and the godly energy of fury, clenched her chest. Both sins were resonating violently at the moment. The sin of greed. The godly energy of greed. The godly energy of greed was crying in his mind. It was truly a curious experience for him. Perhaps it was because he obtained it only a moment ago, but the godly energy of gluttony had never expressed its feelings like this. The crying of the godly energy of greed never expressed itself with concrete words. So, Yong-ho just felt it. It seemed like he was complaining why he changed the flying direction. He laughed unwittingly. The complaint of the godly energy of greed was very brief, but it conveyed a due message to him that it should. It was none other than the godly energy of greed that the great king of greed Mammon had used over 1,000 years ago. This was the godly energy of true greed. It was also the last gift of the King of Violence to Yong-ho. It was an object that he put up like a tombstone in Mammon's grave to pay homage to his master. That was all. All kinds of color radiated from the magic field mounted on Yong-ho's left arm, which had been called the new godly energy of Mammon, or new greed. It wasn't just a simple resonance, and Yong-ho noticed it. The magic field that he needed to get the recognition of Mammon's 12 spirits was not something like the godly energy of new greed. Scathach was mistaken about it. Chapter 262, The King of Greed 2. The purpose of this artificial godly energy, which Mammon had designed but never completed, was never a substitute for the godly energy of greed. It had a different purpose. Yong-ho didn't know what the purpose was, but it was now clear. He sorted out his complicated thoughts. His heart, which was beating so violently as if it would burst at any moment, returned to normal. The true godly energy of greed that was held in his right hand turned into a bracelet and was placed on his wrist as if to imitate Amun. It was just next to Amun. The godly energy of greed. She is finally back. Amun spoke in a wistful voice. Yong-ho could feel the godly energy of greed responding to Amun's voice. At that moment, he remembered something that also had remained in both Amun and the godly energy of greed. Mammon, the king of greed, didn't deal with Amun alone. The magic spear of the Red Lotus. What he dealt with was Amun, that became one with the godly energy of greed. When Mammon was climbing the stairs of the celestial world alone, he separated Amun from the godly energy of greed. After leaving Amun behind, he headed for the celestial door with the godly energy of greed. Finally, Amun and the godly energy of greed became one again. Amun regained its true power as the magic spear of the Red Lotus that could burn heaven and earth and evaporate the sea by wielding it only once. "Are you the king of greed?" the Queen of Fury called Yong-ho. He hesitated for a moment as to what to say, but he made up his mind to tell her. He spoke confidently to his ally. The godly energy of greed has come back. Now, Yong-ho had not only the two sins of greed and gluttony, but also two godly energies pairing with them. Even though she was his ally, he was now a formidable partner for her. But the Queen of Fury was not afraid or jealous of him. Rather, she was really pleased. Kaiwan and Catalina murmured, "Yeah, she is behaving as expected." Yong-ho quickly spoke to the queen. "I will be back soon. Please take care of your own people and wait here." She didn't expect it, but she nodded cheerfully. "Okay, I will wait." He turned right away. He had to hurry back to the labyrinth of greed. He needed to meet Citri and talk a lot with her. But he couldn't because he still had a lot of work to do, master. "Giant flying vehicles are approaching this way," Lucia shouted through Tiamat's terminal. The surviving representatives of the 8 clans, whose invisible air barrier system was broken by some director's ambush of the dungeon market, belatedly discovered them approaching their way. Catalina identified the flying creatures first, this time again. They were so enormous that she could discern them from a far greater distance than when she noticed the godly energy of greed. They were blue. It had big wings, a big tail, and gorgeous scales. A dragon. It was Yong-ho's first time seeing a dragon. Shortly after Catalina shouted, others could also confirm the dragon's appearance. Moreover, it was not just one. Behind the giant blue dragon's back was a red dragon, and another was a black dragon. Extremely wary of dragons, Ketimuka urgently triggered an urgent alert. Then the Queen of Fury's bodyguards were on a combat mode immediately, and the spirits of the Mammon family that were on tense alert took their own weapons. But Yong-ho didn't show any concern. The Queen of Fury knew who was flying toward her Ankablosa. As if responding to the Queen's call, the huge blue dragon landed on the ground. The overwhelming presence of her giant body, which was dozens of meters long, dwarfed Bone Dragon. Landing in front of Yong-ho and the Queen of Fury, she took the shape of a human by casting the spell of transformation, one of the dragon's strong merits. She now turned into an Asaras with impressive dark hair. An Asaras was characterized by her slimness, but given the attribute of Ankablosa, she was more tough than slim. She showed due manners to Yong-ho and the Queen of Fury, accompanied by 2 other dragons, who turned into an orc and a dark elf respectively by triggering their own magic. Commander of the Dragon Legion, the farthest watcher, Ankablosa, is honored to meet the King of Greed and the Queen of Fury." She looked at them alternately and soon realized that they were the ones that the King of Violence referred to in his final message to her. Ankablosa was a woman by any standards. As soon as she exchanged greetings with them, she immediately got down to the point without giving them any background explanation. His Majesty, the King of Violence, referred to the King of Greed in his last will. "Can both of you lend me your hands for a moment? I would like to convey his last will to you." Although she was using honorific language to them, it seemed she was talking informally, perhaps because of her lofty and stately atmosphere unique to Ankablosa. Yong-ho didn't hesitate to take the hand that she stretched out. The Queen of Fury was about to reach out to Yong-ho too, but withdrew it behind her back, noticing she didn't have to. It seemed she was mistaken, that their hands, including his, would form a triangle shape. It was an interesting situation at the moment, but Ankablosa was so serious that both Yong-ho and the Queen of Fury just focused on holding their hands. Ankablosa immediately conveyed the late King of Violence's will to them. The voice of the King of Violence was echoing in the heads of Yong-ho and the Queen of Fury. "Mobilize the dragon army. Find the King of Greed and help him. Stop the worst demon god with him." What the King of Violence meant by the worst demon god was the King of Pride. Yong-ho could figure out why the King of Violence didn't refer to the King of Pride merely as a king, but the demon god. The King of Pride had strength, terrifying mana, and godly posture. After conveying his message, Ankablosa first let go of her hand. She explained what she knew. Because as the same dragon as the King of Violence, she had the direct chance to listen to the king's last will. The King of Violence made a suicidal attack on the King of Pride as soon as he conveyed his last will to me. I think he had two reasons for that. First, he wanted to damage both the King of Pride and the dungeon market. Secondly, he didn't want to have his essence taken away by the King of Pride. The King of Violence was recognized as the strongest dragon in the demon world. As such, it would bring about the worst situation if the King of Pride took his essence. Ankablosa continued, "We don't know the condition of the King of Pride, but he must have been dealt a fatal blow. In fact, when the King of Violence made a suicidal attack, not only his hideout rear, but also its surrounding area disappeared without even leaving any trace. Given such a strong explosion and its impact, it was highly unlikely that the King of Pride avoided his fatal attack." Ankablosa said, "Currently, the generals of the dragon are gathering their troops scattered across the territory of the King of Violence in one place, and at the same time, they are destroying the facilities of the dungeons still left intact within the King of Violence's territory. I came here to meet you, the King of Greed, ahead of my main troops." Ankablosa paused for a moment and gazed at Yong-ho for long. Her gaze was as sharp as a blade. "If you have anything to order me, please tell me. I and my dragon army will obey your command." She made a simple declaration, but at first glance it felt like a test to him. So, he responded naturally after making eye contact with her. "Help the Queen of Fury destroy the distribution channels of the dungeon market and its branches in her territory. Besides, I want you to protect the territory of the Queen of Fury." In fact, he discussed the matter of destroying the various facilities of the dungeon market within her territory. Since his order was rational and reasonable, Ankablosa accepted his request readily. "Sure, I will. Let me get down to the business right away." The orc behind her turned into a red dragon again and flew away. It seemed that the orc wanted to convey Yong-ho's order to the Dragon Legion. Yong-ho looked at the Queen of Fury again and said, "Dhritarashtra, I would like to repeat it if I may. The current situation was obviously not good. However, it didn't mean the situation was necessarily bad for Yong-ho, because he could combine all the troops under his integrated command. I'm going to meet the Queen of Sloth. See you back soon, Citri." The Queen of Sloth, Yong-ho, did not hide the fact that she was with him and his subordinate spirits at the moment. It was nothing new to the Queen of Fury, but the Queen smiled at him warmly. Although she was exhausted by the tragic happenings in various parts of her territory, she tried not to look weak to him. "I will be waiting for you." At that moment, Yong-ho wanted to touch her face, but he quickly controlled the urge. She was not Catalina or Kaiwan. Yong-ho wrapped up the meeting with Ankablosa politely, then hastily returned to Tiamat, the giant red dragon, and his main base. Although he had the strong support of the powerful Dragon Legion, He was rather nervous and uncomfortable because of the King of Violence's last will to him. His subordinate spirits, including Catalina, gave Yong-ho some time to think alone. Rather than thinking about the King of Pride, he leaned deeply back in the captain's seat and pondered over other things. He lifted his right hand where Aemon and the godly energy of greed were embedded. Although he received it so suddenly, the true godly energy of greed was finally in his hand. Since he had the experience of exercising the true power of gluttony through the godly energy of gluttony, he became curious about the power of greed. Chapter 263, The King of Greed 3. The sin of fury turned its owner's anger into strength. The angrier the owner of the fury was, the stronger her power was. The power of the sin of lust was temptation. All those who could not overcome the temptation became slaves of the king of lust. The power of gluttony was eating. Using the power of gluttony, Yong-ho could eat not only pure mana, but even the magic once processed or the energy of the sword. Then, what was the power of greed? I do not know either. Yong-ho blinked his eyes before he knew when Aemon replied. Aemon continued. Mammon used the power created by the mix of greed and the godly energy of greed only to neutralize and weaken the power of other kings. Sickness. I don't know why. Maybe he did so because of the peculiarity of greed, or because I may have not grasped the true power of greed. The more he heard it, the more confused he was. So, he focused on the godly energy of greed, just like he did when he exercised the power of gluttony. But its reaction was different. Unlike the godly energy of gluttony that he could instinctively understand how to use, the godly energy of greed did not tell him anything. I wonder if it has no power at all. But the godly energy of greed immediately responded to his thinking like that. To be exact, it must have been mad at him. The power of greed is the power of possession. Maybe there was a clue there. Maybe the power of greed was somewhat irrelevant to the battle, just like the power of evolution. Master, it seems I'm pushing you hard, but I have something to tell you by all means. Aemon changed the topic. When Yong-ho concentrated on something else, Aemon kept talking. When you fought the King of Lust, you used only the power of gluttony while forgetting your greatest power and the power of greed that you have been using for a long time. The special ability that is activated by combining sin and magic is obviously powerful. But that's not all. I believe the owner will know it well. Sick. Aemon was right. When fighting the King of Lust, Yong-ho did not properly use the power of greed. It would be more correct to say he didn't put it to operation. Yong-ho had two sins, greed and gluttony. In terms of a car, it was like having two engines. If so, he had to exert the power of both engines. The King of Pride acquired the power of envy. Unlike Yong-ho, he used both the power of pride and the power of envy at the same time. The synergy effect of the combined powers was much more powerful than he thought. Yong-ho immediately understood what Aemon was trying to remind him. He had to learn to use two sins at the same time to confront the King of Pride properly. After he was done talking with Aemon, he cleared his mind in a break with what he used to do. While Tiamat was carrying him to the labyrinth of greed, he wanted to take a break, so he closed his eyes. Apparently notified by Lucia, all the spirits of the House of Mammon, including Chwiryong, came out to welcome Yong-ho, even though it was very late at night. He stroked Chwiryong's hair, whose eyes were shining brighter than usual, then headed straight to the Garden of Life. Chwiryong seemed a little disappointed when everybody, including Yong-ho, was busy, but he could not afford to pay attention to her now. The closer he got to the Garden of Life, the more impatient he was. Even though he already heard from Lucia that Citri was in good condition, he was still very worried about her health and safety. He needed to check her condition by himself before he could feel relieved. Kaiwan was as impatient as Yong-ho, so the two quickened their steps in no time and almost ran to the Garden of Life. So, they finally arrived at Skathak's mansion. As soon as he opened the front door, Yong-ho gasped for breath while Kaiwan rolled her eyes to look for Citri. They saw Yustia and Samael momentarily, but they didn't care. They were looking at only the red-haired woman buried deep in a chair made of blue waves. Citri, he shouted. The red-haired woman responded to his call like the way she did, as always, my beloved customer. Her familiar and simple greetings were more than enough to make him feel so much relieved. He smiled broadly at her response. Then he stepped forward and approached her. Citri opened her arms to him, and the two naturally hugged each other. He felt warm when he hugged her. He could see what made her different from Catalina and Kaiwan. The difference wasn't that he was holding her, but that he was being held in her arms, Citri. He called her again, and Citri tapped him on the back lightly. Their short but friendly hugging ended. "What a relief," he said. Citri nodded quietly. Then she hugged Kaiwan, who approached her hesitantly. Only after she hugged them did others exchange greetings with her. "I, Samael, director of the Dungeon Market, am pleased to greet you, master of the Mammon family." She still used her title as a director of the Dungeon Market. He looked at Samael. Seeing her severed left arm, he agonized a bit, but said softly, "I am glad to see you in person like this. Scathach can heal your wounded left arm. Thank you for your consideration." After bowing to him politely, she sat next to Citri. Right at that moment, Yonghos' subordinate spirits, including Catalina, Scathach, and Gusion, arrived at Scathach's mansion. After greeting them all, Citri started talking again. "My beloved customer, as you know, so many things happened during the last few days. It is no exaggeration to say that the balance of power of the demon world has completely collapsed. 3 of the 6 kings died. The king of violence, the king of envy, and the king of gluttony no longer existed. The king of pride absorbed the power of the king of envy, and the king of lust helped him. Yongho, the king of greed, took away the power of the king of gluttony and joined hands with the queen of fury and the queen of sloth. Besides, there was a realignment of various forces under various kings. The king of pride had the support of the dungeon market, with the addition of the territories of the king of envy, king of lust, and king of gluttony. On the other hand, Yongho had the support of the forces of the king of violence, led by the Dragon Legion and the queen of fury, his ally. He also owned the unclaimed lands in the south. His stronghold, the south and north, were divided. This kind of ambiguous power structure would be changed completely within a few days. I don't know why the king of pride gained so much power. However, he is both the enemy of the Mammon family as well as the demon world. So, you have to stop him. The last will that the king of violence left behind just before his death was truly strong. The current king of pride could be said to be the worst demon like the king of violence, pointed out. Citri paused for a moment to catch her breath. She had a lot to talk about with Yongho, but what she had to tell him and others right now was the forces of the king of pride. 3 directors of the dungeon market were all under the command of the king of pride. As a result, various resources of the dungeon market, such as its spirits and distribution networks, also fell into the hands of the king of pride. But this area in the south was not occupied by the king. It was only been several days since the coup happened at the dungeon market. The 3 directors didn't touch Citrus territory at all. I did not form any separate force, but that doesn't mean that I didn't care at all. My beloved customer, I understand you have already peeked into my warehouse, right? Yongho recalled what he saw in the virtual space of the dungeon market. He saw dozens of large flying vehicles, including the giant red dragon, Tiamat, and mammoth flying spirits in her warehouse. Citri gently reached out and grabbed Samael's left hand, who was seated next to her. Samael said to Yongho, "I also have some power that I hid somewhere. The traitors didn't take away all of my power. Some of the distribution networks in the territory of the King of Gluttony are still in my hands. The most valuable items in a special auction house are also in my possession. It was not that all of the properties at the dungeon market were stolen by the 3 directors. Neither Citri nor Samael were easy targets to them." When Samael was done talking excitedly, Citri touched her hand again. After pausing for a moment, Citri continued, "My beloved customer, I am the Queen of Sloth, but at the same time, I'm the founder of the dungeon market. So I can do something. I would say it's the kind of insurance that I have prepared for myself." Citri quietly fidgeted with her fingers. Then there appeared in the air a light map of the demon world. Citri pointed to the northern part of it and said, "I have a master key to freely use all distribution channels and warehouses at the dungeon market. Of course, Abrasax and Bifrons do not know this." The distribution network of the dungeon market was drawn above the map of the demon world. Distribution channels connected to each other like a spiderweb were located widely, not only in the territory of the King of Pride, but also throughout the northern part. Besides, there was specific information about the location of several warehouses and facilities. All this was very valuable for strategic purposes, and Citri said clearly that she could use all those distribution channels and warehouses with the master key. Perhaps you have only one chance to use it properly, because Bifrons will notice the existence of the master key after you use it, but how fatal your one-time use depends entirely on you. The balance of power of the six kings was broken, while there was formed a new balance between the north and south. And Yong-ho now possessed a dagger that he could stab into the heart of the north, although he could use it only once, the master key. Citri continued to talk about what Yong-ho had to do next. Chapter 264. The King of Greed. For Citri went on. The King of Violence was not deprived of his essence by the King of Pride. The King of Pride's plan to defeat the King of Violence may have been successful, but his plan to go to a higher level through the King of Violence failed. Moreover, he must have been hit hard. Although the King of Violence's suicidal attack was very unfortunate, Yong-ho didn't think the King of Pride was killed by his attack, for the power of the King of Pride was too powerful. The King of Pride had 8 horns of light, 6 wide wings of light, and a huge halo of light rising above his head. Indeed, it was godlike power and majesty. Citri's relationship with the King of Violence wasn't that deep by nature. It was more than 1,000 years that they existed in the demon world, but they met face to face for a dialogue only a few times, and even in that case, she talked to him as one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market, not as the Queen of Sloth. It was only a few months ago that their relationship changed. Knowing what happened to Mammon in the past through the godly energy of greed, the King of Violence also discovered the true identity of Citri. The King of Violence had no ambition to rule the demon world. He simply sought knowledge as an observer of the world. The King of Violence first contacted Citri. He did not covet the sin of sloth or its godly energy. He just wanted to meet her to hear from her more about what had happened on that day and the place where Mammon's last fight took place. Meeting the King of Violence, Citri realized that his pure respect for Mammon was genuine. Thus, Citri signed a contract with the King of Violence. Through a special magical contract, she told him specifically about what happened on that day, and the King of Violence granted her request in return. The reason why he made the King of Gluttony restless by suddenly moving the Dragon Legion to the eastern border was because Citri wanted it. It wasn't just because of Citri that the King of Violence told the Queen of Fury to use him more actively, but Citri played a role to some extent. Her conversation with the King of Violence gave Citri an unexpected joy. She found it was not as painful as she thought to share Mammon's last moment with him. While talking with the King of Violence about it, Citri felt that her wounded heart was healed. That was why she could maintain her relationship with the King of Violence, and their contractual relationship was useful in unexpected moments. The moment when the King of Violence was ready to attack the King of Pride at the risk of his life, and Abrazax, terrified in advance, deactivated the disturbing magic he had cast in the air. Citri could receive more information than expected through her contractual relationship with the King of Violence. Citri thought of the King of Violence, reminiscing about the king, who was wise and intelligent, unlike his nickname of Violence. Citri continued, "You should not neglect the death of the King of Violence. You have to use the Dragon Legion he left behind, and the time he gained for you." She seemed to be tired after talking long, so she paused for a moment and caught her breath before continuing. Under the best scenario, the King of Pride was severely injured, and Abrasax and Bifrons were killed. But that would be an overly optimistic scenario. So, let me tell you, under the assumption that the King of Pride was injured heavily, and we have gained time because of his wounds, the territory of the King of Gluttony was expanded in the light map of the demon world. Samael raised her left hand to point to the king's territory. A surprise attack through the dungeon market is now impossible. So, there will be an all-out war between the south and north. If that's the case, the first thing we need to attack is the territory of the King of Gluttony. There is currently no king in that territory, and there is a big turbulence in the country at the moment. Moreover, you can mount a surprise attack through the distribution channels that are still in my possession. It's time for us to ambush the King of Pride now. The king of gluttonous territory changed its hand overnight. Even though the king of pride tried to attack the forces under the command of the queen of fury by mobilizing a huge army, he didn't get anything. Besides, the supreme commander, king of pride, was severely wounded. It was no exaggeration to say that the territory of the king of gluttony was in turmoil. Catching her breath, Citri spoke again. You don't have to occupy the territory of the king of gluttony. Like you did before, you can launch a hit-and-run strategy of dungeon attacks on a larger scale. The important thing is to gather the essence of the dungeon and grow your beloved dungeon soul, Lucia, so she can take full control of the labyrinth of greed completely. What? As if she was surprised by Citri's sudden mention, Lucia shouted. Citri looked at Yongho after smiling for a moment. Complete Mammon's godly energy. Completely occupy the labyrinth of greed to be the true owner of the dungeon and unleash all its power. You have to be on par with Master Mammon of the past in order to confront the king of pride who boasts of the most mighty power. The power of the dungeon was its master's power. The growth of the dungeon soon caused the master's growth. The labyrinth of greed was the dungeon of Mammon, who could be said to be the strongest demon king ever. So, it was the strongest dungeon. Yongho could understand fully why Citri told her to completely conquer the labyrinth of greed. He had to conquer it to complete the godly energy of Mammon. But Citri's last words provoked Yongho. Wait a minute, wait, Citri. She clearly said he needed to be on par with Mammon to confront the king of pride. Yongho felt something different when she mentioned it. Not only Yongho, but the others that were also gathered there felt the same way. Citri. This time, Guxian whispered to him. He intensely glared at Citri with an angry expression, so much so that everyone in Skathak's mansion turned their eyes at him. Guxian, Citri calmly called him, which made him even angrier. Our master Mammon had 3 sins, and now Yongho, our new master, has 2 sins of greed and gluttony. In other words, Yongho needed another sin and godly energy to be on par with Mammon. Although it might sound weird, obtaining Mammon's godly energy was easy. Since it was a tool, all he had to do was just obtain it. But in the case of the sin, it was different. To obtain another sin, Yongho had to kill the owner of the sin. If so, who should he kill to obtain another sin? King of lust. King of pride, his greatest enemy Catalina, who belatedly grasped what was going on, uttered an exclamation before she knew it. Kaiwan looked at Citri, clenching her fists. Guxian opened his mouth again, almost growling. If you are going to say you will sacrifice your life to our master, I'm not going to forgive you. Citri's soul is broken, but she was still a queen with one of the 7 deadly sins, with as many as 7 horns. If Yongho could kill her and take her essence, he could obtain the 3rd sin and rise to a higher level than now. With everybody keeping silent, Citri faced Guxian. Faced with him, who was like an angry bull at the moment, she didn't lose her composure. Guxian, you hate me! Right, Citri, shouted Guxian. His loud shouting shook Skathak's mansion, let alone the Garden of Life. It was not just Guxian who reacted violently. Unlike Guxian, Yongho was upset too. He could not take her essence by killing her. Citri looked at Yongho. She saw Skathak, who was about to cry at any moment, and heard Aemon, who already arose into the flames of the Red Lotus. Citri shook her head and held Yongho's hand gently. She didn't want to create a sad atmosphere like this, but she was touched by their violent reaction or resistance to her insinuation. She said in a tearful voice, My beloved customer, don't worry. I don't want to die comfortably as if I was running away from you, leaning all the dirty work to you. I was Mammon's former lover. I'm very greedy like him. I would like to see my beloved master happier than now, with lots of children in the future. Then she turned her eyes at Catalina and Kaiwan. Catalina flinched the moment she heard it, and even Kaiwan blushed. Citri smiled, looking at them. The power of greed is possession, so it's something that only the king of greed can do. Besides, Yongho had the godly energy of greed. The basic function of the godly energy was to reinforce the power of sin. My beloved customer, you can use Kaiwan's power of distortion and Tigria's power of unity because you have made them your subordinate spirits who had such power for many years. However, not all the masters can use the power like you. Even if they obtain power in the same way, they can't exert their power properly, because the moment they become another master's subordinate spirits, their power becomes very weak. Over time, it may even disappear. Yong-ho was different from other masters. Even now, Kaiwan and Tigrius could use their power as well as they did before they were made Yong-ho's subordinate spirits, and Yong-ho could also make good use of their power. The only thing that Yong-ho lacked was his skill in using them. Greed never missed out on the power that came into its realm. Power is the power of the soul that the master has. It's also the same with sin. If power is the power of the master, sin is the power of the king. Yong-ho now could understand what Citri was talking about. Everybody was surprised. My soul is still poisoned by the celestial power. Because of this, if you get connected to my soul, it can hurt you, my beloved customer. Citri grabbed his hand tightly and said, looking straight into his eyes, take the Queen of Fury as your subordinate spirit. Just obtain not only her body and soul, but also her sin. Citri's suggestion was ridiculous. The Queen of Fury was the head of the 8 clans. She was Yong-ho's ally. She obviously had a favorable opinion of him, but it had nothing to do with her becoming his subordinate spirit. But Citri didn't back off. When Yong-ho was embarrassed, she continued to persuade him, you don't have to do it right now. Yong-ho still had some time. He could make her his subordinate spirit, even after defeating the King of Pride. You are the King of Greed. You're the most greedy man in the demon world. So, I believe you can do it. Can you do it? Letting go of his hand, Citri smiled playfully and even winked at him. Gusion, who got sullen and upset because of Citri, was dumbfounded. While Skathach blinked, Kaiwan and Catalina sighed at the same time. Eustia rummaged the fortune cards again. Skull burst into laughter after a long time, and Armin whispered alone in flames, making everybody confused. Is it because of your anguish in the end? Yong-ho didn't reply. Only the sin of greed and its godly energy gave off a subtle power. Chapter 265, Massive Strike 1. The light that the King of Violence created by sacrificing himself eliminated the western area from this world. Not only the King of Violence's hideout, Rare, but also the surrounding forest and its inhabitants were also eradicated without any trace from this world. The dragons did not go back to the area where everything was gone. The dragons that were living near the king's hideout moved north and east according to the king's last will, preparing for the upcoming war. The night of the demon world was dark blue. The sun, coming from the east, turned the whole world blue or almost black with its red ray. The sunlight reached the land that was gone now. The sun drove away the full night in that place where even small birds didn't come back because of their instinctive fear. The wind blowing from the east wandered around on the empty land, and it soon turned into a little whirlpool. There was nothing or nobody in the land, so no one witnessed the tiny whirlpool created by the wind quickly transforming into something else. It was a twist. Mana raged in the whirlpool created by the wind, which created a passage to a place that would have been impossible normally. Only mana would swirl in a small twist, but in a slightly larger twist, some other beings from other places descended through the passage. But this time, nothing special came out of the twist. It was neither mana nor any special being that came out of the twist. It was something different from mana, or something that could be called a force. The mana scattered around the twist had been altered, or rather contaminated. It was an unusual distortion. Actually, it happened everywhere in the demon world a long time ago. A strong wind blew again, passing through the traces that the cracks of the world left behind, which could no longer be called a twist. Yong-ho didn't want to open his eyes. He didn't want to wake up to face the reality. It was always dangerous outside one's blanket, but unfortunately he opened his eyes wide before he knew it. Half asleep, he looked at the ceiling with a blank expression. His bedroom was on the first floor of the Labyrinth of Greed, namely on the first basement level, so there was no window or sunlight. But the room was bright because Lucia turned on the lighting device of the room at the scheduled time. Sleepyhead, it's time to wake up. Please tell me if you want to sleep a little more. One now. Let me tell your subordinate spirits, including Gusion and Skathach, that you want to put off today's schedule a little later. Of course, Yong-ho could not sleep any longer. He moved his fingers after overcoming the temptation to stay a little longer on the bed, which was stronger than the temptation of the succubus. In the corner of the bed, which was spacious enough for a mixed martial arts game, though not for running, Catalina was crouching with a blanket all over her body. She usually slept late in the morning. He reluctantly got up from the bed and looked at the other side of Catalina. Unlike Catalina, Kaiwan was an early riser, but she was not seen on the bed. Apparently, she got up early and went out to wash. A long and tedious day passed, and another day broke. It was no exaggeration to say that the world was overturned by the King of Pride, but Yong-ho didn't need to be obsessed with the new reality. He needed some break to fight back. Finally, he got up from the bed. After taking off Catalina's blanket, he left the bedroom with her on his back, who was still half asleep. It was time for him to start the day. This is the essence of the guy called Orobas. I've brought it here because I thought it would be better for you to take it than me. Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits gathered at the gate control station in the space located on the 9th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed, not Scathach's mansion. Yong-ho looked at Samael for a moment after receiving the essence of a brilliant color from Guzion. Having lost all her subordinate spirits to the 3 directors of the dungeon market, she made eye contact with Yong-ho with a calm expression. In fact, she already expressed gratitude to Guzion for taking revenge on Orobas. Without hesitating anymore, Yong-ho grabbed Orobas' essence. As the strongest power of the dungeon market, he had 6 horns. As a red demon, his mana was clearly 1 level below Yong-ho's maximum mana, but it was still very powerful. Orobas was much stronger than Kaiwan or Catalina, who had 6 horns like him. Orobas' essence looked really tasty. Not only greed, but also gluttony was craving for it in Yong-ho's soul. However, Yong-ho did not immediately take it. He overcame the temptation, even by exercising patience, the power of Eustia embedded in Mammon's godly energy. Of course, it was because he wanted anything like an ordeal that he suppressed the temptation. It was because he wanted to create a synergy effect for an instant big growth. When he raised his right hand that didn't hold Orobas' essence, Scathach and Samael stepped forward at the same time. The 2 women knelt in front of him and raised their hands to hold his hands. From now on, the ceremony of making Scathach and Samael Yong-ho's subordinate spirits will take place. The current subordinate spirits of the Mammon family, please unleash your power to help our master. In fact, Yong-ho planned to make Scathach his subordinate spirit a long time ago. In the case of Samael, Samael herself strongly requested it, while Eustia politely refused it. Eustia said she could give Yong-ho advice freely as an ordinary spirit, not his subordinate spirit. But Samael, craving for revenge, needed more power. It was only Yong-ho who could give her more power than when she was a director of the dungeon market, because she lost her own dungeon and her subordinate spirits. The directors of the dungeon market were considered to be on par with the kings in terms of power, although they didn't have sins or godly energies like them. Even from Yong-ho's point of view, it would be greatly helpful if he could make Samael, the fastest wing, his subordinate spirit. Despite a decrease in her mana, she still had 6 horns. He closed his eyes. All of the subordinate spirits shared their strength through Brigada. Lucia registered Scathach and Samael as Yong-ho's subordinate spirits at the same time. He took Orobas' essence at the moment when his mana was about to increase as a result of their registration. By simple calculation, Yong-ho now had 3 types of mana that was equivalent to 6 horns. His gluttony devoured all of its power. His greed did not allow even the slightest leaking of power out of his body. Soon, his body changed. The 6 horns on his head disappeared at once, and instead 7 horns of light appeared. Like the king of lust, he now had 7 horns. It meant that his mana now went beyond the power of a 7-horn mana. I can feel the power. Lucia screamed in a mixture of pain and pleasure. So did his subordinate spirits, who gathered in a circle around him. Eligos, Ophelia, and Tigrius enjoyed a remarkable increase in their power. A 6-horn soared between the 5 horns that sprouted over their heads. Samael was thrilled. She now felt a stronger force than she was as a director of the dungeon market. Kaiwan and Catalina, who already had 6 horns, gained mana that was close to the average mana of Mammon's 12 spirits. Despite the rule that as the number of subordinate spirits increases, the amount of mana that they could gain would diminish, Yong-ho's subordinate spirit's mana increased remarkably. Yong-ho thought it was possible because of everybody's cooperation. Orobas essence the Gusion obtained, taking Skathach and Samael as Yongho's subordinate spirits, the synergy effect of the sin of gluttony and the sin of greed, Tigrius' synthetic union and Yuhoyuan's power, harmony, and the subordinate spirits sharing of their power through Brigada. As soon as they were done, they gasped for breath. As the moment that seemed like an eternity passed, the mana filling the space door control station scattered in search of its owner. Catalina and Kaiwan squatted down, and even the strong red demons, Ophelia and Eligos, trembled their knees. Tigrius broke into a cold sweat, leaning against his cane. It was only Skull and Gusion, who were standing without moving at all. Wet with sweat, Samael raised her body and said after bowing to Yongho, "Master of the Mammon family, as well as my body and soul, I'm going to attack the territory of the King of Gluttony. Please give me a go-ahead." In fact, Yongho set up the attack plan yesterday. The more quickly she ambushed them through her own distribution channel, the better. Moreover, it would be possible to check out the situation of the King of Pride's camp through the surprise attack. Sure, let me approve it. Go and strike them as much as you can. Responding to him with a smile, Samael magically connected the space door control station to her dungeon distribution channel. In the meantime, Uriah and Baduk, who was watching from a distance, ran quickly and handed out the energy recovery potion to all of the subordinate spirits. Yongho devised 2 teams for the attack on the territory of the King of Gluttony. Gusion's team included Eligos and Ophelia, while Samael's team included Skull, Skathach, and Tigrius. Since they were going to attack through the distribution channel of the dungeon market, not just the door of space, Yongho could mobilize a large number of troops. Each team included the exclusive spirits of the arena, Skull's unit, as well as the spirits of the dungeon market taken from the warehouses of Citri and Samael. Headed by Skull Abroad, Bucephalus, all the subordinate spirits except for Ammon, Catalina, and Kaiwan left the labyrinth of greed. Yongho couldn't figure out how many times he would dispatch them in the future, but he felt he could evolve all of them once more before having it out with. The King of Pride. Given the synthetic reinforcement, he could strengthen them much more than now. After seeing them off, Yongho got down to the next job right away. The reason he had Kaiwan and Catalina with him was he had some work to do with them. Chapter 266, Massive Strike 2. The 11th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. It was the place guarded by Juno in Virgo, the last one of Mammon's 12 spirits. The 11th floor, where the Mammon family's large banquet room and various living spaces were located, had a huge number of dungeon monsters. Moreover, as if to prove their power, even the weakest monster was powerful enough to be a 4-star spirit by the standards of the dungeon market. However, it was the King of Greed, his guardian knight, Catalina, and his companion, Kaiwan, who entered the 11th floor now. Even the dungeon monsters that drove the masters of the Mammon family to the upper floors couldn't be their match. Amon, who became one with the godly energy of greed, proved that all the old legends of the demon world were true. The green flames full of the energy of greed spread ferociously to burn the dungeon monsters, all at once. Catalina and Kaiwan also unleashed their new strength freely. A dark shadow and the whirlpool of the sword swept the dungeon monsters. There were only 3 on the 11th floor, but it took less than an hour for them to destroy all the dungeon monsters on the 11th floor. As the attack was done so quickly, Salami, who followed Yongho's party as a possible reinforcement, just looked at his master and companion blankly, not knowing how to help them. "We have intelligence given by the dungeon spirit. Justia, in Virgo is currently located in the large banquet hall. If you go straight ahead, you will see the door of the large banquet hall." As Lucia said, the grand banquet hall where Mammon used to hold a banquet with not only the 12 spirits, but also all the dungeon spirits of the Mammon family was vast. When Yongho opened the door, he saw a much larger and wider space than the Garden of Life. There were lots of white tables and chairs under the blue sky and green trees. Guided by greed, Yongho crossed them all and stood in front of a small white building resembling Skathach's mansion. A round blue door opened automatically, the colorful mosaics shining in the sunlight, and the beautiful yet elegant interior where white doves seemed to come out, didn't draw Yongho's attention. Yongho, Catalina, and Kaiwan all looked at the woman with silver hair sitting in the middle of the house, with their eyes closed. The legendary story about her was true. She was a surprisingly beautiful woman. She was the woman who could be compared with Citri, the most beautiful woman Yong-ho had seen in his lifetime. While Citri was a living beauty, the woman in front of him was a mystery itself, who seemed to disappear anytime soon, as if she was a woman taken out from a painting. Unlike the sin of gluttony that was quiet at the moment, the sin of greed once again raised its voice. Then, as if responding to this, the woman in Virgo slowly opened her eyes. Yong-ho and his party were reflected in her eyes that changed colors according to the direction she looked at. Extremely tense before she knew it, Catalina swallowed, and Kaiwan also looked at the woman with her lips tightly closed. The woman blinked and soon tilted her head. Then she said in a voice which was as beautiful as her appearance, "Elune." No one expected her to mention that name. That was why none of them could respond immediately, and the woman who got up from her seat, in Virgo, approached Catalina. She said, "You can't help it too. Were you born again under the same star sign as before? Did you get the drunk dragon's bliss? Besides, this time, you have become the guardian knight of the Mammon family." Pardon. Catalina was embarrassed when Yuno asked a barrage of questions unexpectedly. She couldn't understand what Yuno was talking about. Yuno looked straight at her with her unshakable eyes and said, grabbing her hand, Yuno, who is counting the stars and who discerns one's soul. You have been born with the spirit of Elune. I can tell you that the souls that went through the astral line were all the same, but I can say clearly that you can still be called Elune's reincarnation. Please forgive me for treating you informally. I was so happy to see you that I didn't take into account your situation. Catalina's eyes twinkled violently. At that moment, Kaiwan cut in quickly. Wait a second. Did you say Catalina is Elune's reincarnation? Then, Catalina's previous incarnation was Elune. Even Kaiwan was apparently dumbfounded, unable to put together the mysterious puzzle. Yuno said calmly, "As I said before, I can't equally treat the soul that passed through the astral line, the vast sea of souls wrapping around the stars, and the soul that didn't. However, there is something left behind after the soul passes through the astral line. You can call it the essence of the soul. And in that sense, this woman can be rightly called Elune's reincarnation. Of course, she is a bit different from the reincarnation you think of." Catalina and Kaiwan found it hard to understand her explanation. However, what she kept repeating shocked Catalina. "I am Elune's reincarnation." Catalina raised her hands unwittingly and covered her blushing face. If someone had said it, Catalina would have ignored it out of hand, but it came directly out of Yuno's mouth, one of Mammon's 12 spirits. So she trusted Yuno, and her heart was full. How could she not be thrilled when she heard that Elune, the object of her admiration, was her own past life? Her ears and tail flapped violently. Yuno looked at her very curiously. She continued, "I'm just amazed to know that you are born under the same star sign as Elune, not only in your past life, but also in your current life. Besides, you have the blessings of the drunk dragon. I've never seen a soul like you. You really deserve to be Elune." While she got carried away with the uncontrollable thrill, Catalina recalled the alter ego of Elune on the 3rd floor of the Labyrinth of Greed and soon covered her face fully with both hands. Somehow she blushed and felt shy. Her flapping ears and tail drooped. At that moment, Kaiwan cut in again. "Hey, what about me? How was my previous life?" She spoke in a very excited voice, something Young-ho hardly noticed before Yuno replied after tilting her head, "I really don't know. I don't think you are included in the list of people that I know." In fact, this was normal. After throwing cold water on Kaiwan's high expectations, Yuno finally turned to Young-ho. She gracefully expressed due manners by slightly lifting the hem of a pure white dress that matched her silver hair and neat look. "Please forgive me for introducing myself to you. You're the new King of Greed heir to the great Mammon family. I, one of Mammon's 12 spirits who is counting the stars, am honored to meet you." Her calm introduction made Young-ho feel less embarrassed. He looked at the last of Mammon's 12 spirits, and she looked at him calmly. Then she said in a voice mixed with yearning and wistfulness, "You look very like him." Young-ho didn't even have to ask who he was. Catalina, who seriously thought about sticking her nose in the dish with her face covered with her hands, raised her head suddenly. She seemed to expect something new. Really? I can't believe it. Wasn't Yong-ho the reincarnation of Mammon? The great king of greed. Yong-ho was born with the sin of greed for the first time since Mammon. Moreover, he had the power of evolution like Mammon. He also knew how to use Aemon, who used to be Mammon's best friend. Besides, there were lots of things that Yong-ho achieved. It was no exaggeration to say that each of Yong-ho's achievements was a miracle. He was a special being, no matter what anyone said. Chwiryong kept swallowing with her fists clenched. Then she suddenly shook her head. Oh, no, I can't. Come to think of it, there was Sitri. If Yong-ho was Mammon's reincarnation, what would be his relationship with Sitri? Yuno said that the reincarnation she mentioned was different from what Chwiryong or Catalina thought of, but she did not specifically explain what was different. Moreover, the question was how Sitri would take it. Chwiryong looked at Yuno with an expression mixed with anticipation and worries. Yuno shook her head, then said in a voice mixed with wistfulness and regret from the beginning, "You look like Mammon a lot, but you are not him. The one who is right in front of me is the completely new king of greed." Having said that, she turned to Chwiryong. It seemed that she mentioned it with Chwiryong and Catalina in mind in particular. Catalina blinked her eyes and slowly flapped her ears, while Chwiryong let out a sigh of relief for some reason. Yong-ho also felt strange at that moment. She said he was not Mammon's reincarnation. In a way, what she said was right, but it seemed that he was expecting to hear something like a special secret of his birth from her. Yuno smiled again and said, "But it's very strange. I feel like His Majesty Mammon is right now with the new king of greed." This time, Yong-ho was also persuaded by what she said. Indeed, he had lots of Mammon's legacies, so much so that he was another Mammon. When Yuno was done talking, the flames of the Red Lotus arose right next to Yong-ho. Yuno, who was talking to them in a small voice, spoke up for the first time. "Aemon, it's been a while, Yuno. Fai, I want to share my joy with you slowly, but the time is not good. Suddenly, the House of Mammon is faced with a very grave danger." Aemon briefed her about the current situation shortly and clearly. Yuno's fine eyebrows frowned. She realized the crisis of the Mammon family, but some other factors made her feel unpleasant. The king of pride who took possession of the sin of envy, and the king of lust helping the king of pride. It was exactly the same political situation as it was 1,000 years ago. Among the 7 deadly sins, greed, fury, and gluttony were with the Mammon family, while the sin of pride, the sin of envy, and the sin of lust were hostile toward the Mammon family. Chapter 267, Massive Strike 3. Yes, she is still alive. She is with us now, but she has been poisoned by the celestial world. Yuno's face hardened even harder when she heard the expression poisoned by the celestial world. Instead of asking for further explanation, she immediately said to Yong-ho, "The new king of greed. It would be useless for me to test your majesty in the current crisis. I recognize your majesty. I will provide you with power that the great Mammon has secured for me." Since Yong-ho already experienced it several times, he immediately lifted up the magic field in his left hand. When Yuno gently touched the magic field, a light pink color filled the few remaining holes of the magic field. The power of Yuno in Virgo, who was counting stars, was love. She could be said to be a collection of all emotions. Aemon had already belonged to Yong-ho, so now Yong-ho had to get the recognition of Richard in Leo. Once he recognized him, Yong-ho would finally get the recognition of all the 12 spirits of Mammon. Yuno looked at the remaining hole, then raised her head again to see Yong-ho. "But your majesty, I cannot be your subordinate spirit. My soul has been contaminated with the power of the celestial world like Sitri." That was why she stiffened her expression when she heard about Sitri. Yuno knew better than anyone how serious it was to have one's soul contaminated by the power of the celestial world. The labyrinth of greed and the godly energy of Mammon are based on Mammon's 12 spirits. So, if you want to bring out the power of both completely, you must have all the 12 spirits first. Yong-ho currently has 10 of them. He started off with Catalina and Eligos. Skull was his first subordinate spirit. Ophelia and Tigrius devoted themselves to Yong-ho when he was in the process of occupying the unclaimed land in the south. As Yong-ho's companion, Kaiwan laid the foundation for the Mammon family to stand tall. As Mammon's former deputies, Gusion and Scathach pledged their loyalty to Yong-ho, Samael dedicated her body and soul to Yong-ho to get even with the King of Pride and the 3 directors of the dungeon market who destroyed her dungeon as well as her subordinate spirits. Armon, the magic spear of the Red Lotus, had been with Yong-ho anywhere. Now, the only one of Mammon's 12 spirits that Yong-ho had to obtain was Richard, who had mighty combat power comparable to that of Gusion. My job is to count the stars in the sky and check out people's relations. It seems that the person who is fit to inherit the power of love is already hovering around. Your Majesty, King of Greed, I can feel your bondage with her. Catalina quickly looked at Kaiwan, but Kaiwan nodded with a sigh because she could figure out who Yuno was referring to. I am wondering if he can really make her his subordinate spirits. Catalina, who was Illune's reincarnation, inherited her power, justice. Kaiwan herself inherited Magnodon's power passion, while Ophelia took Asclepius' honor as her strength. Skull and Tigrius chose death and harmony that best suited them. Scathash and Gusion possessed life and courage respectively, and Richard's strength was trust. Since Samael inherited Baruna's creation, what was left for possession was Justina's patience and Yunos' love. It wasn't yet decided whether Eligos would inherit patience or love, but no matter how much Yong-ho thought about it, love was not suitable for him. Kaiwan connected love with Dhritarashtra, the Queen of Fury. To her chagrin, she felt it was a perfect match for the Queen of Fury. If Kaiwan could put aside her own ego and private feelings, she would welcome with open arms Yong-ho having the Queen of Fury as his subordinate spirit. In that case, Yong-ho would be able to add the power of the Queen in addition to the Sin of Fury. But is it really possible? The Queen of Fury was the head of the 8 clans in her territory. There were countless people who trusted and followed her there. As the name suggested, a subordinate spirit was literally subordinate to its owner. Because of this, such a being was supposed to dedicate not only his or her body and soul, but also their lives to the master. In the case of Kaiwan, she offered to be his subordinate spirit. Others in her position would not have become his subordinate spirit, even at the risk of their lives. If the Queen of Fury became Yong-ho's subordinate spirit, it would mean that the entire people of the 8 clans would also belong to him. Could the Queen of Fury, head of the 8 clans, make such a decision? No matter how much she liked Yong-ho, that was something possible and something impossible in the demon world. Of course, there was one variable. It was the King of Pride. If not only the 8 clans, but also the whole southern land would be in danger of being taken over by the King of Pride, who, the King of Violence, even described as the demon god, the Queen might change her mind. Of course, it could happen only under the worst scenario. Yong-ho thought there was something lacking. He needed some more to make the Queen his subordinate spirit. Kaiwan, who also had a lot on her mind at the moment, frowned. Yong-ho put his hand on Kaiwan's shoulder and said, "Let's do what we can do now." What is it?" Instead of answering, Yong-ho ordered Lucia, staring into the air. "Lucia, please register Yuno as a general spirit first." "Okay, master." Lucia immediately started registering Yuno as a general spirit. Unlike the subordinate spirit, being registered as a general spirit didn't need to connect his or her soul to their master, so Yuno did not reject the registration. Moreover, she needed to be registered at least as a general spirit in order to leave the mansion where she was staying, just like Justina did. Yong-ho then looked at the ceiling and floor. Upstairs was the last one of Mammon's 12 spirits, Richard and Leo, and below were the 12th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed and the 13th floor, the last one. Either way, there was no reason for him to delay things anymore. "Catalina, choose it," said Kaiwan cheerfully on purpose. Catalina erected her tail. She pouted her lips and pointed at the ceiling. Yong-ho respected Catalina's wishes. Many things changed before and after the death of the King of Violence. The forces under the command of the King of Pride fought a fake war with the forces of the King of Envy no longer. The kingdoms of the demon world could survive because they had a strong central point called King. After realizing that the King of Envy was killed, those masters under his command didn't resist anymore, just like the masters under the command of the King of Gluttony did. They gave up their loyalty to the late king and joined the forces of the king of pride. The forces of the king of lust, who had remained silent for a long time, finally revealed himself in the demon world. In addition to the succubus and incubus, several witches and lustful demons who organized and participated in Sabbat formed the main pillar of his forces. And those dungeon monsters and beasts, who'd been seduced by the forces of lust, posed themselves as the vanguards. Although the forces of the King of Gluttony suffered great damages by Yong-ho and his party's ambush, their power could not be ignored. Among the 3 masters who surrendered to the King of Pride, the 2 surviving masters, the third was killed by Samael, gave up not only the dungeons destroyed by the surprise attack of the Mammon family, but also the whole southern territory adjacent to its unclaimed area. Then they gathered all their troops in the north and formed a solid alliance with the forces of the King of Lust. The King of Pride and the King of Lust were nowhere to be seen. However, the movement of their forces suggested that the 2 kings were still up and running. Even the Dungan market openly supported the King of Pride. As the forces in the north moved, so did their counterparts in the south. They moved their troops at the same time as if the cogs were meshing together. The forces of the Queen of Fury, which destroyed all distribution channels of the dungeon market in the Queen's territory, gathered at the border to confront the forces of the King of Lust and the King of Gluttony. The dragon legion that flew from the west also joined the Queen's forces. It seemed like a great war would happen anytime soon. It was terrible tension and tranquility that dominated the borders, that the Queen of Fury, the King of Gluttony, the King of Lust, and the King of Envy shared with each other. On the 4th day after the death of the King of Violence, one of the 8 clan reconnaissance units from the Karvinka clan lost contact with the Queen of Fury. Since they were operating in the territory of the King of Pride, it wasn't unusual to lose contact with them any time. Because of this, the 8 clans mourned the death of the reconnaissance unit, but did not feel strange about their death. A small village on the periphery of the King of Gluttony's territory disappeared. Since everyone focused on the border areas, very few people noticed that the village had disappeared. Even those who noticed it were not interested anymore. They just thought it was only one of the many damages caused by the Mammon family's surprise attack. Several wanderers disappeared from the west of the unclaimed land destroyed by Embryo. Since they were literally wanderers, no one knew when and how they disappeared. Rather, it was not known at all that they disappeared. The green dragon, Kaidelion, shuddered. Though he tried to scream as hard as he could, all he could do after squeezing his voice was just murmuring. He was still very young, but he was a dragon. Since he changed to his original body, he was a dozen meters long. However, Kaidelion couldn't fly or kick off the ground. At that moment, a huge, white, glowing hand gripped Kaidelion's neck and did not let go of it. It was a bizarre scene. Although he twisted his body in the air, it was tightly held by the huge arm. One huge arm was filling the twist in the air. It was not known what was beyond the twist, but what was clear was that the being beyond the twist wanted to come over this way. Kaidelion felt instinctively that it wasn't just physical force that pressed him. His body and soul were being destroyed by the force that squeezed his neck. Kaidelion, who had been struggling for a long time, eventually closed his eyes and drooped. He didn't move anymore. The twist that was rotating while creating cracks in the air now diminished. The shining being beyond the twist, which struggled to increase the twist even a little more, soon withdrew the huge arm as if it gave up. The green dragon, Kaidelion, disappeared with the huge arm, and his extinction, just like other extinctions occurring simultaneously throughout the demon world, was not known to others. The twist has disappeared. The passage between the worlds that was opened for a while was closed, and another passage was opened from a distance. That number was still low. However, the speed at which the passage opened became slightly faster. A greater twist occurred. Chill wind from the north blew hard. At the moment when the south and the north started the war, some kind of erosion began in an invisible place. Chapter 268. Dhritarashtra 1. Richard in Leo was a silent man who valued actions rather than words. And he kept his reticence even at the moment when Mammon's 12 spirits gathered together for the first time after 1,000 years. Anyway, that guy's mouth is as close as an oyster. Gusyon grumbled about him, but he was smiling though. Hugging Gusyon's arm, Skathach gazed at Richard warmly, who was always the same. the large banquet hall on the 11th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. Richard and Leo lowered himself on one knee in front of Yong-ho. Since he was so big, Richard could see him at eye level, even though he lowered his posture deeply. Yong-ho also did not go to the trouble of explaining to him about the necessity to make him his subordinate spirit. So, he accepted Richard in Leo as his 11th subordinate. A blue light was added to Mammon's godly energy. The blue light symbolized Richard's power, trust. The life of Skathak, the immortal witch. The death of Baphomet, the demon of slaughter. The justice of Elun who cuts the moon. The creation of the eight-handed Baruna. The honor of Asclepius, the night of the sun. The harmony of Yuho Yuan in yin and yang. The courage of Guxian with the Herculean power. The trust of Richard, the silent warrior. The passion of Magnodon who scolds the earth. The patience of Eustia who leads the way. The love of Juno who counts the stars. 11 soft lights radiated from the circular plate attached to the surface of the godly energy of Mammon. Amun whispered in the flames of the red lotus. I also acknowledge you as my master, the new king of greed. Finally, the 12th light was added. It was bright red, symbolizing Amun, the magic spear of the red lotus. Those subordinate spirits who stayed connected with Yong-ho could feel it. Yuno and Eustia, who signed a contract as Yong-ho's general spirits, knew it through the 12 lights. At this moment, Mammon's godly energy had been completed. Now that Eligos inherited Eustia's patience, all he needed was his 12th subordinate spirit who could inherit Yunos' love. Yong-ho reaped power from Mammon's godly energy. Yong-ho had Richard stand up by putting his hand on Richard's shoulder lightly. He then looked at the stairs leading to the 12th floor. Now opening the 12th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed, Lucia spoke, and Yong-ho stepped forward. Mammon's 12 spirits and Yong-ho's new 12 spirits followed. Unlike previous floors, the 12th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed was a space only for Mammon's 12 spirits. Whenever Yong-ho moved one step forward, darkness retreated automatically. There was no single dungeon monster on the 12th floor which was filled with Mammon and his 12 spirits' power. Salami, who was following Bucephalus walking after Skull, looked around, blinking his eyes endlessly. Although Salami evolved into a spectacular spirit after being upgraded from Fire Elemental Dragon to Great Fire Elemental Dragon Emperor, he was still Salami. The omnipotent mana excited him. The structure of the 12th floor was simple. There was a large rotunda in the middle, and 12 rooms were placed around it. Kaiwan nudged Catalina in the ribs with her fingers and asked, "Don't you recall anything now, something like the memories of your previous life?" If each floor of the Labyrinth of Greed was an exclusive space of Mammon's 12 spirits, the 12th floor was a private space. Accordingly, there must be more private memories embedded in this space than any other floor. Recognized by Yuno as Elun's reincarnation, Catalina struggled to recall anything, but eventually she failed with her ears and tail drooping. I don't have any memory of this place. I can think of anything. Was it really true that she was Elun's reincarnation? While Catalina was feeling gloomy, Mammon's 12 spirits, watching her feeling dejected, nodded almost at the same time. Obviously, she was like Elun's reincarnation. Since Lucia needed some time to take over the 12th floor, Mammon's 12 spirits stepped toward their own room. The new 12 subordinate spirits belonging to Yong-ho also did not just stay in the hall. As if guided by their inherited power, all of them headed to the rooms of Mammon's 12 spirits. Watching Kaiwan heading to Elun's room while holding Catalina's hand, Yong-ho grabbed the air with a smile. Then he entered Aemon's room in front of him, holding Aemon in his hand. It was a spacious but desolate space. There were no proper decorations between the stone walls, the floor, and the ceiling. What was in the room was a low-sized altar, located alone in the innermost part, but Yong-ho couldn't take his eyes off the altar. Standing before it as if he was bewitched, he looked at the hole where he could put the spear and the decorations around it. He uttered exclamations before he knew it. "Oh my God, yes, my master. This is the place I met my master for the first time. Probably, you could have reached this place thanks to a special connection like the arena." Armin spoke in a low voice. His voice rang nostalgic, as if he missed that day. It was only several days after Yong-ho became the master of the Mammon family that he met Armon. It was not that long ago, but it looked like a distant past to Yong-ho. I hoped you here for the first time, said Catalina rather proudly, as if she was boasting to Kaiwan. Kaiwan frowned while Yong-ho chuckled. It seemed like Catalina talked about her going down the floor with him after falling down. Yes, I know, I hugged you for the first time here. It was true that he hugged Catalina and rolled over the floor, but it was also true that this was the place where he evolved her for the first time. To be precise, her evolution took place at a place that connected Aemon's room with an unknown space, but he didn't have to mention it. Yong-ho, who recalled he touched Catalina's thigh for the excuses of strengthening her agility, acknowledged his lustful inclinations at that time. I think I know what you're thinking. Your anguish is rising. Ignoring what Aemon just said, Yong-ho left Aemon's room with Catalina and Kaiwan. As if he was waiting, Skull approached him. Skull. Skull was holding very large scythes in both hands. One was a long, sharp sword and a black blade all in one. Yong-ho had never seen it before, but he could see what it was as soon as he saw it. A purple color that symbolizes death rose softly from Mammon's. Godly energy. Is it? Baphomet's sickle. Skull nodded. The pitch-black scythe wasn't just a weapon, but it was Baphomet's alter ego. Baphomet needed that scythe to exist as the incarnation of death. Because of this, Magmadon, who was wary of Baphomet's dangers, weakened his power by separating Baphomet from the sickle. Skull's request was simple. He wanted Yong-ho to unite him with Baphomet's sickle through synthetic reinforcement, but this kind of synthetic reinforcement, which combined Yong-ho's subordinate spirit with an artifact, could only be done once, unlike Yong-ho's other evolutions. That was why it was best to do it with a good artifact, given the choice. But the problem was that Yong-ho could miss the right time for synthetic reinforcement while looking for the best possible artifacts. At a moment when his war with the King of Pride was around the corner, it was foolish for him to postpone the synthetic reinforcement, waiting for better artifacts. During the past few days, Yong-ho did a number of things at the same time, apart from taking a surprise attack on the territory of the King of Gluttony. One of his tasks at the moment was the selection of the artifacts for reinforcing the synthetic reinforcement of his 12 subordinate spirits. The treasure storage of the Labyrinth of Greed, the warehouse that only collected exclusive magic devices of Citrus Dungeon Market, and the auction items that could be called the Legend of Samael's special auction house. Kaiwan chose the Dragon Heart, which she had been coveting all the time. It was the Dragon Heart of Aernasaga, the Silver Dragon Lord that became the material for the Silver Dragon armor, Yong-ho's favorite. At that moment, Yong-ho did not forget to pay a silent prayer for Aernasaga, who left it behind. Elagos and Ophelia each selected Green God's Fury and Green God's Wrath from Samael's special auction items. It was armor worn on each arm and leg. Both carried the power of a powerful god of the alien world called the Green God. Tigrius chose the magic cane that Magmadon used during his lifetime, and Catalina chose the Moonlight Sword, Elun's beloved sword after thinking it over. What Samael chose was the heart of the ancient king, which was kept in Citrus' warehouse. It was a magical device made of brigada, but it seemed designed to increase the efficiency of the mana she received from dragons. Mammon's 12 spirits, including Gussian and Richard, were done with synthetic reinforcement or didn't want it, so they were just satisfied with acquiring new weapons. Master, I've taken control of the 12th floor. So let me open the 13th floor, the last floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. All the subordinate and general spirits who were looking around the rooms gathered in the hall again. They looked down the stairs leading to the 13th floor. On the 13th floor was Mammon's room, which was the true heart of the Labyrinth of Greed. Even Citri, who was following quietly, found her eyes welled with tears. The door that was blocking the stairs opened. Upon arriving on the 13th floor, they stood before a steel door embossed with a giant dragon emblem representing Mammon. Yong-ho opened the door again. The heart chamber of the Labyrinth of Greed sensed the King of Greed immediately and welcomed the king gently. The heart room was monotonous. There was only a small passage leading to Mammon's room and an old stone throne, but it was by no means an ordinary throne. After all, Skathat couldn't control her emotions. She burst into tears like a child, and Gusion also tried hard to suppress his emotions, but he eventually showed tears. Yuno bit her lips. Eustia made a densely emotional smile. Yong-ho slowly approached the throne. There was nothing on the throne, but Yong-ho could also feel it. Amon whispered to him. It is now a throne for you, master. Mammon must be very satisfied with you coming here. Chapter 269, Dhritarashtra to 2 Yong-ho touched Mammon's throne. He was seated on the throne with the present and past 12 subordinate spirits of the Mammon family watching him. This time, Catalina and Eligos were choked with emotions, and Yong-ho also shared their feelings. He knew it the moment he sat on the throne. The Labyrinth of Greed was watching him, which remembered everything that had happened in the Labyrinth of Greed from the first day Yong-ho first came to the House of Mammon, until all the happenings, until now, such as the days when Yong-ho had only 2 subordinate spirits, Catalina and Eligos, and the day when he put a straw mat on the red carpet in the Demon King's room, eating and sleeping there. Later, he added dungeon spirits, starting with Goblin John and Ron, to the House of Mammon. Eligos smiled brightly, watching the small makeshift trap and torture chamber, and Uriah and Baduk met for the first time through the jail bars. Skull rolled over the floor like a stone. Rickham and Bergrim joined hands with other dungeon spirits to improve the dungeon little by little. Many other things happened after that. It wasn't just Yong-ho who saw it. Everyone in the heart room could see their own memories. I, Ophelia, Inderion's daughter, am honored to see you, the great king of greed. Ophelia knelt in front of Yong-ho and expressed her courtesy. Eligos, who shed tears a lot, knelt before him along with her. He could not speak because his voice was hoarse, but his action a moment ago was enough. Instead of laughing heartily as he did, Skull also showed due manners to Yong-ho. It wasn't just the new 12 subordinate spirits of Yong-ho who bowed to him politely. Mammon's 12 spirits also did the same, and the last one of them approached him. My beloved customer, as the Queen of Sloth, I, Citri, am pleased to see you, the new King of Greed that I admire. At that moment, everyone in the Labyrinth of Greed knew. Rickham and Bergrim, who were working on the ground floor of the House of Mammon, and Uriah, who was digging potatoes along with Baduk and the dungeon meerkat, also realized it. I have completely captured the Labyrinth of Greed. My beloved master, the Labyrinth of Greed is now completely yours, Lucia announced, and new mana was injected not only into the heart chamber, but also into the entire Labyrinth of Greed. Now, the Labyrinth of Greed had returned to the Mammon family after 1,000 and hundreds of years. The reason why the heart of the dungeon was called heart was not simply because it was the most important facility of the dungeon. Just as the heart of a living thing supplied blood to the whole body, the heart of the dungeon also injects mana into the dungeon. Until now, it was the heart of the dungeon located on the ground floor of the House of Mammon that supplied mana to the Labyrinth of Greed. But now it was different. Since Yong-ho completely took control of the Labyrinth of Greed, he could utilize the true heart chamber that had been sleeping for the last millennium. The relationship between the dungeon and its master was close. The stronger the dungeon was, the stronger its master was. When the master became stronger, his dungeon also became stronger. Lucia, the soul of the dungeon, was like Yong-ho's alter ego. Therefore, he vividly felt the process of everything about Lucia being transferred from the heart chamber on the ground floor to the deepest one, as if it happened to him. On the day Mammon died, the soul of the Labyrinth of Greed also died. In order to prevent the destruction of his 12 spirits, Mammon terminated his contract with them. As a result, the Labyrinth of Greed was separated not only from Mammon, but also from his 12 spirits. Lucia soothed the solitude of the Labyrinth of Greed. She became united with the Labyrinth of Greed on behalf of the soul of the dungeon where Mammon lived and died. The heart chamber of the dungeon was filled with Lucius energy. A blue light, which was like Lucius' symbol, spread everywhere into the wall, the floor, and the ceiling. It was as if a new stream of water dipped the dry riverbed. A lump of blue light gathered before Yong-ho's eyes. It was the magic of space leap. The light immediately exploded, and a girl with blue hair appeared among the shattering piles of light. It was Lucia. Lucia, with translucent butterfly wings behind her back, rotated in front of Yong-ho. Lifting the white hem slightly, she smiled at him broadly. Ain't I cute like a fairy? 4 intacts. To taking control of the Labyrinth of Greed, I have grown a lot, too. The way she flapped her large butterfly wings was pretty cute. However, Yong-ho expressed doubts about her look. You're still the same as before, except for your wings. Lucia looked like a girl less than 10 years old. Thanks to her young age, her butterfly wings looked well on her, but it had nothing to do with her growth. Lucia replied after clicking her tongue, I could have been a well-proportioned beauty, but if I do, I have to feel sorry for Uria, right? She is my only friend in this dungeon, so we need to grow together. Lucius' original body couldn't leave the dungeon's heart chamber, while Uria couldn't go down alone to the innermost floor where the dungeon's heart chamber was located. Because of this, even though they became friends with each other, both had little time to play together. But it would be different in the future. Lucia, who became the true soul of the Labyrinth of Greed, gained freedom of movement. She could now freely move anywhere within the Labyrinth of Greed. Now Lucia could play together with Uria. How much loneliness would Uria feel if Lucia alone became an adult? Lucia wanted to be her friend, not her sister. Yong-ho was moved to hear Lucia talking about Uria like that, so he looked at her warmly. It was the same with other subordinate spirits. However, only one, Aemon, responded differently. Well-proportioned beauty. This is the first time in hearing that, but I think I know what it means. Wester's anguish. But Yong-ho stopped him from talking anymore by violently shaking his right arm, where Aemon was embedded. Then he took a deep breath. He quietly moved his fingers in the air and checked out the map of the entire Labyrinth of Greed. As expected, only one place was left for him to conquer. It was a place that Yong-ho hadn't been to yet. Even now, he didn't know what was in that place, although he was the true owner of the dungeon. But he didn't have to mention it now, because not only him, but all his subordinate spirits knew where it was located. Yong-ho looked at everyone before he stood up from the throne. Then he asked Mammon's 12 spirits in a low voice, is it okay? He was asking them whether he could step into that place or make it his own. Skathak nodded first and said, the true owner of the Labyrinth of Greed is now our young master. Oh no, our master. Definitely you can. If you come across anything that should not be seen, it's the fault of our master Mammon, who died without hiding it, Gusyon added. Yustia and Yuno also showed approval by smiling at him. Lastly, Citri approached him and spoke while gently overlapping her hand on the back of his right hand. It's his room. But it's my beloved customer's room now. So he wouldn't even care. Mammon's room on the 13th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed, the bedroom of Mammon, who made the greatest achievements in the history of the demon world, Yong-ho, stood up from the throne. At that moment, Catalina, who was standing side by side with Kaiwan, fluttered her ears. He didn't need to use the rapport between his status as the master and his subordinate spirit to talk to her. He read her mind immediately and ordered readily, come on, Catalina. Just like my escort knight, come with me. Her tail flapped fiercely, like a puppy who heard she was okay to eat a snack. Kaiwan hugged her arm and said in passing, well, I'm going with you because I'm his wife. It was none other than Mammon's room. Kaiwan definitely wanted to go in and look at it. Ophelia closed her lips tightly, barely holding up the urge to follow him, while Eligos wiped his tears as if he was touched by what was happening before his eyes. When Catalina and Kaiwan walked with him on both sides, he approached Mammon's door, located right behind the throne. He opened the door engraved with a red dragon, Mammon's symbol. It was not a very big room. Actually, it was large enough to house a whole basketball court, but it was never too big to be called Mammon's room, who built the most powerful force in the history of the demon world. Besides, its interior was just plain, with luxurious furniture. His room had nothing like furniture except for a bed, a table, and a few chests of drawers. Only his bed was unusually large, which reminded Yong-ho of his own room. Nonetheless, Yong-ho felt the room was special because it was Mammon's room. Catalina and Kaiwan began to look at the details closely, such as the walls and ceilings one by one, like those who entered a museum. Did I expect too much? Yong-ho slightly let down his shoulders. Of course, he didn't expect any great treasure in Mammon's room. What Yong-ho wanted was a conversation with Mammon. Elun, Yu-ho Yuan, and Magneton left their own alter egos on each floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. Thanks to this, Yong-ho could chat with them, though briefly. Any possibility that Mammon left his own alter ego here? If that's the case, can I have a conversation with him? Of course, even if he could talk to Mammon. Yong-ho didn't want to ask him how to overcome the current crisis or any know-how on increasing his power drastically. He just wanted to chat with the great Mammon with a pure heart. Well, come to think of it, it must have been pretty hard for him to send off his 12 spirits. Of course, like a loon, he could have left behind his alter ego before going to the battlefield, but it looked like Mammon would not do that. Chapter 270. Dritara Shutra 3. Actually, Yong-ho saw the memory Mammon left behind when he obtained the demon god's heart in the human world. Come to think of it, there was something strange about it. Mammon said he did not regret his choice. What was that choice that he mentioned at that time? Did it mean his alliance with other kings to prevent the invasion of the celestial world, or did it mean his decision to block the door to the celestial world alone? The two choices didn't make any sense anyway. For example, as for the alliance, he would have mentioned anything like regret because the other kings didn't yet betray him back then. As for his decision to stand up to the celestial world alone, he had little time to do so. In fact, he was in an urgent situation where he had to return his 12 spirits back to the demon world. So, it was unreasonable for him to open the door to the human world in order to send the demon god's heart. If so, then what was it? Why did Mammon leave the demon god's heart in the human world? And why did he mention the qualifications of his successor? Yong-ho shook his head lightly and got all the doubts out of his mind. Maybe he was thinking too deeply. He was not quite sure if Mammon's regrets were necessarily related to the door of the celestial world or the other king's betrayal. Catching his breath calmly, he set about his next task. Invoking the power of greed, he found a passage to a secret room somewhere in Mammon's room. The room itself responded to his greed. The wall that Catalina was looking into suddenly cracked, revealing a secret door. Startled, Catalina looked at Yong-ho, and Chwiryong quickly approached the secret door. The steel door engraved with the dragon's head was tightly sealed. Yong-ho put his hand in his pocket, then took out the key to the secret room, the last reward that he obtained in Mammon's arena. The pure white sand in a large bowl formed various shapes, high and low. A little bit of color was added to this, which soon created a great map of the entire demon world. The red sand moved over the three-dimensional map of the demon world. The sand was lumped together in four, all of which was inching toward one point. As if rising up against the red sand, the blue sand also moved on the map of the demon world, but its number was not even half that of the red sand. It seemed to be swallowed up by the red sand, wriggling threateningly. Too many. The red sand was the northern forces, while the blue sand was the southern forces. Dhritarashtra, the Queen of Fury, stared at the map with her teeth clenched. It was natural that the northern forces were overwhelming numerically. They were a combined army of the four forces of the King of Pride, the King of Envy, the King of Lust, and the King of Gluttony. Of course, the earlier fight between the forces of the King of Pride and the King of Envy reduced the number of their troops to some extent, while the forces of the King of Gluttony lost half its troops. Despite that, the four armies of the four kings formed a unified army with powerful military strength. On the other hand, the southern forces were a combined army of the Queen of Fury and the King of Violence. Although there was an unclaimed land in the south, it didn't build up a large army like other kingdoms because it had been divided for a long time. Comparing the military strength between them, the combined forces of the four kings were twice the number of their counterparts. Besides, they had the additional resources of the dungeon market's forces, so they had a tremendous numerical superiority in the number of troops. Although we are numerically inferior to them, we are superior in terms of the quality of the troops and their military strength. Even if they have hundreds of thousands of skeleton soldiers or goblins, they won't be able to outpower our dragon army, said the blue dragon, Ankabloza clearly, who was sitting next to the Queen of Fury. Even though she was in a polymorphic state of a slender apsaras, she had a discerning judgment. The Dragon Corps numbered only 100. However, their combat power was recognized as the strongest in the demon world. Ankabloza didn't say that merely to comfort the Queen of Fury in this crucial situation. The northern forces totaled more than 100,000. It was the first time in the history of the demon world that such a large army was created as a group like that. However, most of the troops consisted of low-level soldiers such as skeleton soldier, orc warrior, and goblin rider. Accordingly, the dragon army could easily defeat them, given the choice. Besides, we do have the forces of the King of Greed. right?" asked Ankablosa. When she quickly moved her long and thin fingers, new green sand was added to the top of the map of the demon world. The number of the sand was only a handful. So much so that when added to the blue sand, it didn't make much of a difference, but its quality was different. Ankablosa had learned over the past few days how the forces of the King of Greed, led by Yong Ho, smashed the forces of the King of Gluttony. The subordinate spirits under the command of the King of Greed, namely Yong Ho, were unusually strong. Although they numbered just a little over 10, all of them were strong enough to have more than 6 horns, which was literally incredible. Besides, some of them, whose power was almost equal to the king despite their lack of sin and godly energy, also belonged to Yong Ho's subordinate spirits. Indeed, they were an elite force that could be found in legends. When Ankablosa told her about the power of the forces of the King of Greed, the Queen of Fury, who was full of worries until a moment ago, made a relaxed smile. Watching her smile brightly, Ankablosa smiled bitterly. As a matter of fact, the King of Violence loved the Queen's pure and innocent heart. "Ankablosa, you're right. Now is not the time for us to despair. It's time we found a way to win." As if she pulled herself, the Queen of Fury spoke energetically. As if on cue, Gardemundi opened the door of the Queen's barracks and came in. The spies of the Karvinka clan in the rear noticed the reinforcement of the King of Greed. "You can confirm it through the telescope." The Queen of Fury changed her expression once again, but she flinched a bit instead of standing up right away. Ankablosa understood her feelings. She expressed gratitude to the Queen for her warm consideration, then suggested, "It would be nice if you could go out for fresh air for a moment and check the forces of the King of Greed coming to us." Do you really think so?" After all, Ankablosa grinned at her instead of smiling bitterly. Then she said with a nod, "Yes, I think so." The Queen of Fury stood up from her seat and stepped forward with a bright smile. Shortly afterward, the Queen of Fury blankly looked at the big telescope directed toward the sky in the south. Kirtimuka opened her eyes wide, and Ankablosa was embarrassed to see the King of Greed's forces flying toward them. The King of Greed and his forces were overwhelming, to say the least, surpassing the Queen of Fury and her deputies' expectations. Ankablosa realized that some of the Dungeon Market's forces were included in the King's forces. It was a large, combined army led by the giant red dragon, Tiamat. Dozens of flying vehicles and flying spirits were flying the sky with such a terrifying force that the Queen of Fury and her people on the ground were overwhelmed at their grandeur might. "I, Dhritarashtra, Queen of Fury, would like to welcome the King of Greed." The Queen's voice was not heard in real time, but in the video recorded through magic. Moreover, the background of the video was not on her fortress or her field barracks, but on the back of the wild bird, Astra. Yong Ho, seated in the captain's seat of the giant red dragon Tiamat, knitted his brows. The Queen of Fury in the video was hiding her tense look with a casual smile. She made this video on her way to the battlefield because she had no time to greet him in person due to the enemy's sudden attack. What is the status of the war? It seems that the battle is about to begin. The sea communication is not smooth because there is a strong magic field all over the battlefield. After replying, Lucia spread the light map of the entire demon world right next to the video of the Queen of Fury. The current battlefield was the plains in the northeastern part of the Queen of Fury's territory. The Queen chose to make a turn to stop the northern army that appeared out of the blue sky. As a matter of fact, the larger the size of the army was, the more difficult they could carry out a covert operation. Anyway, the northern army was a large army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, so the southern army did not miss the movement of this huge northern army. According to the observation, their fighting should have broken out 3 or 4 days later at the earliest. But such a prediction was wrong. The forces of the King of Pride, the King of Envy, and the King of Lust were suddenly added to the forces of the King of Gluttony who were facing the southern army up close. About half of the northern army began their march at a terrifying pace and forced the southern army to confront them. This was possible because of various movement magics and the Dungeon Market distribution channels installed all over the northern area. Of course, Yong Ho himself used the distribution channels to ambush the forces of the King of Gluttony, but he could not hide his surprise at the massive movement of the Northern Army. There was a fundamental difference between moving 100 elite forces and moving tens of thousands of forces. Even Samael, one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market, was also embarrassed. Yong-ho changed his strategy immediately. What was important now was the battle between the forces of the north and the south. Since the troops mobilized by both sides was so huge, the King of Pride and the King of Lust could appear. Yong-ho concluded that he could not leave the Queen of Fury confronting the 2 kings. I ordered the supply troops to be separated from the main forces. The main forces must move to the battlefield right away. The battle fleet of the Mammon family filling the sky was divided into 2. The battleships headed by the giant red dragon, Tiamat, picked up their speed to head toward the north.